Sales feed. When was the last time you became inspired? I mean, truly inspired with ideas that could make a real impact on your work. I was once inspired to create my own M&M puppet theater. You see, the M&M stood for magic and marionettes. It even had a grand M&M candy reveal as the finale. At $50 a show, I was able to buy enough Legos to make an entire city, which is not bad for a 10-year-old. But in business, the right strike of inspiration can increase your sales, improve your team dynamics, and solve a problem that has been plaguing your company for far too long. You see, inspiration is magic, but it can be hard to harness. You can't just sit down and become inspired. It takes the right combination of attitude and preparation to grab hold of the idea before it slips your grasp forever. So, do you want to know my secret for how to find inspiration? Well, I'll gladly share it. But first, I want to tell you about one man who found inspiration in the most unlikely of places. It starts with a chilling scene on a cold morning. I'm Andrew Davis, and this is how it all began. It was the morning of January 17th, 1977, and a man named Gilmore was sitting in a chair. In front of him, 5 other men were standing shoulder to shoulder with rifles in their hands. Gilmore, a man from Oregon, was about to face the consequences of his actions. You see, just 1 year ago, he had brutally murdered 2 helpless victims. The manner of his crime was so shocking, he had been sentenced to the ultimate penalty: death. As Gilmore sat there, looking at the men who would kill him, he heard another person standing by his side. Any last words? Gilmore just took a deep breath. Here he was, confronted with the greatest uncertainty a man could face. He opened his mouth and uttered 3 words. Then, a sack was placed over his head, and the other men raised their weapons to fire. 5 years later, in 1982, another Oregon native was sitting in a chair. But this man wasn't facing a firing squad. No, he was simply looking at a basement room filled with a rickety card table and 3 of his colleagues. Their advertising agency wasn't very impressive. In fact, they didn't even have a phone. They had to rely on the payphone down the hall. But this man, a man named Dan, had a pocket full of quarters, a borrowed typewriter, and the determination to make his agency a success. The men waited. Then, with a creak, the door in front of Dan opened to admit a tall man with shaggy blonde hair. The man opened his mouth to speak. "I just want you to know I hate advertising." It wasn't a great start to a meeting with his biggest and only client. But Dan just smiled and invited the newcomer to sit and talk. It was the first step of a working relationship that would span decades for the 2 men. But 5 years later, the tall man's company was struggling. Despite years of dominating its industry in the 1970s and early 80s, the annual report for 1987 painted a bleak picture. Sales had dropped by 18%, earnings had declined by 40%, and the stock was valued at only 93 cents per share. Several competitors had taken advantage of the new trends and were sailing ahead with newer, fresher, more exciting products. The tall man's one saving grace was his relationship with Dan. You see, Dan had a relentless ability to dream and inspire. Despite pressure to conform, Dan's agency remained independent and fostered an environment where his team members, his fellow dreamers, could do their very best work. After receiving the grim annual report, the tall man was ready to make a change. With a huge marketing push of $40 million in the works, he asked Dan to create something special to breathe energy into his brand. They needed a way to connect with a wide range of customers from all walks of life, to instill trust in a product that was uniquely designed. In short, they needed a brand revolution. Dan and his team set to work making a plan to reinvigorate the company, and the weeks passed by. It was the night before Dan's presentation, and he was about to pitch his ideas to the team. A huge amount of money was on the line. A half dozen commercials were already filmed and edited, targeting different segments of their market. While each of the spots worked individually, Dan was concerned there was nothing to tie them all together. So there he sat in his office the night before a huge presentation, searching for an idea, praying for inspiration. He took out a pen and some paper and began to write down some thoughts. 20 minutes passed, and he had just 5 scribbled lines on his page. And then, out of nowhere, Dan's mind wandered to a story he had heard about a man from his hometown of Portland, Oregon. He remembered watching the evening news and seeing reports of a man named Gilmore who had been seated in front of a firing squad and famously uttered 3 last words. With a wry smile, Dan looked back down at his paper, the gears churning in his head. Yes, this could work. This could work very nicely. What were those last 3 words? What company did the tall man own? And what sales lesson can we learn from this chilling tale? Find out right after this message from Sales Feed. I'm Andrew Davis, and like you, I know that sales is a tough gig. It's competitive, it's mentally exhausting, and what works today might not work tomorrow. That's why we're here to help. Who's we? Well, we are Sales Feed, brought to you by Vidyard. And we believe in sharing ideas and stories and news and entertainment to help you be more successful, to help you sell more tomorrow. You can find us on LinkedIn and YouTube and Instagram and iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, or head over to salesfeedmedia.com and trade your email address to get the best of Sales Feed in your inbox every single week. Sales Feed, brought to you by Vidyard, because we could all use some fuel for a better life in sales. After his evening of inspiration, Dan walked up to the tall man and revealed a 3-word tagline inspired by Gilmore's famous last words. The tall man just looked at the words and back at Dan. "Oh, come on, we don't need that." It wasn't just the tall man that didn't like the line. Everyone in the meeting seemed to shudder and shake their head upon hearing the idea. But Dan stuck to his guns. "Just trust me on this one." So it was. In 1988, a 30-second commercial ran with an 80-year-old marathon runner jogging across the Golden Gate Bridge. At the end of the commercial, the screen went black and 3 words appeared. Just do it. Yes, the launch of the Just Do It slogan was a major turning point for Dan Wieden and his client, Nike, and the tall man, Nike's co-founder, Phil Knight. A simple phrase, adapted from Gilmore's final words, "Let's do it," would become one of the most powerful marketing slogans in history. The line worked so well because it personally appealed to the wide variety of athletes that used Nike shoes. Middle-aged women up to world-class athletes could feel inspired and empowered. To sum it up, this slogan helped increase Nike's sales by 1,000% over the next 10 years. It let them overtake competitors like Reebok and eventually reach its current value of over $30 billion. All because an advertiser got inspiration from the mouth of a man about to be executed. Now, personally, I'll never look at Nike quite the same way. The story certainly is chilling, but it can still teach all salespeople an important lesson. You see, inspiration doesn't need to come from a predictable place or a set of circumstances. It can come from quite literally anywhere. So, pay attention if something grabs you. Pay attention if an idea or a thought breaks through the noise of your everyday life, because chances are that idea will capture the attention of your customers in the very same way. Even if you don't think an idea is relevant to your audience or product or messaging, be willing and open to the possibility that it might be exactly what you need. The people who first heard Dan's idea hated his new slogan, but for Nike's Just Do It campaign, a killer's last words is where it all began. That's How It All Began is written by Rachel Kraft and Andrew Davis. Our editor is Sean Cleary. Our head of research is Emily Allen. Our illustrators are Sienna Roman and Skylar Fusco. Our production manager is Elizabeth Davis, and our executive producer is Tyler Lessard. That's How It All Began is a production of Monumental Shift and is distributed by SalesFeed and Vidyard. Find us on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next episode of That's How It All Began.